Most people believe wealth comes from big moments, a huge promotion, a lucky stock pick, winning the startup lottery. But if you look at how real wealth is built in America, the truth is much quieter. Because the biggest financial advantage in life isn't intelligence. It isn't access. And it definitely isn't luck. It's time. And nothing exposes that truth more brutally than a very simple question. What happens if you invest $100,000 and do absolutely nothing for 20 years? No day trading. No chasing hot stocks. No checking the market every morning with anxiety. Just time. And depending on what you invest in, the result can be the difference between a decent nest egg and life-changing wealth. But the real story here isn't just about money. It's about human psychology. Because the hardest part of long-term investing isn't the math. It's our brain. Our brain hates waiting. It hates uncertainty. And it absolutely hates watching money sit still. Yet the people who build serious wealth are usually the ones who learn to ignore those instincts. My name is Aiden. And today, we're going to break down what actually happens when $100,000 is invested for 20 years, using real market behavior, real compounding, and the psychological traps that cause most people to sabotage themselves long before those 20 years are over. Because the numbers might surprise you, but the psychology behind them is the part that really changes how you see money. Let's imagine a simple scenario. Someone, maybe you, maybe a friend, puts $100,000 into the market. Not in a meme stock, not in crypto hype, just a broad market index fund, something that tracks the overall US stock market. The same type of investment used in many retirement accounts. Historically, the US stock market has averaged about 10% annual returns before inflation. Of course, markets don't move in straight lines. Some years crash, some years explode upward. But over long periods, that average has remained surprisingly consistent. Now here's where the experiment gets interesting. Instead of adding more money every month, instead of actively trading, you do something extremely boring. You leave it alone. For 20 years. At first, the growth doesn't look dramatic. After 5 years, that $100,000 might grow to around $160,000 if the average holds. Nice, but not life-changing. And this is the exact moment where many people lose patience. Because psychologically, our brain expects progress to be linear. Work harder, earn more. Save more, see faster results. But compounding doesn't work that way. Compounding is slow, until suddenly it isn't. And that's where the real transformation begins. But to understand why the final years matter so much more than the early ones, we need to look at something most people completely underestimate. The invisible power curve of time. Here's something strange about the human brain. We are very good at understanding straight lines. If you drive 60 miles per hour for 2 hours, you know you'll go 120 miles. Simple, predictable, linear. But when growth becomes exponential, our intuition breaks. And investing is one of the clearest examples of this. Let's go back to that $100,000 investment earning roughly 10% per year. After 5 years, about $161,000. After 10 years, around $259,000. So far, it feels decent. You've more than doubled your money over a decade. But here's where things start to shift. At 15 years, that investment grows to roughly $417,000. Notice something. The growth between year 10 and year 15 is larger than the entire first decade. But the real surprise comes in the final stretch. At 20 years, that original $100,000 becomes roughly $672,000. Almost 7 times the starting amount. And here's the part that messes with people's intuition. Nearly half of that total growth happens in the final 5 years. Not because the market suddenly became magical, but because the returns start generating returns of their own. Your money begins working for you. Then the work it did starts working again. It's like a snowball rolling down a mountain. At the top, it barely grows. But by the time it reaches the bottom, it's massive. The problem is, most people quit pushing the snowball long before it gets there. Because those first years feel slow. And psychologically, slow progress feels like failure. Which leads to one of the most expensive mistakes investors make. They interrupt the compounding process. They panic during crashes. They jump between trends. They try to optimize their portfolio every few months. And ironically, the more people try to outsmart the system, the more they sabotage the one thing that actually builds wealth. Time in the market. But to really understand why patience is so rare, we need to talk about something deeper than money. A psychological bias that quietly controls most financial decisions, often without people realizing it. And once you see it, you start noticing it everywhere. There's a cognitive bias that quietly shapes almost every financial decision people make. Psychologists call it present bias. It's the tendency for our brain to overvalue immediate rewards and undervalue future ones. In other words, the future always feels less real. Let's say someone offers you two options, $100 today or $150 1 year from now. Financially, waiting is the obvious choice. But in real experiments, a surprising number of people still choose the $100 today. Because psychologically, now feels certain. The future feels abstract. And investing is basically a 20-year battle against this bias. Because during those 20 years, the market will test you. There will be years where your portfolio drops 20%, maybe even 40%. And when that happens, your brain doesn't think about the long-term average return. It thinks about loss. Behavioral economists call this loss aversion. Losing money hurts about twice as much as gaining the same amount feels good. So when someone watches their $100,000 drop to $70,000 during a market crash, their brain isn't calmly thinking, over the next 20 years, this will likely recover. Instead it screams, stop the pain, get out. And historically, that exact moment, the moment of maximum fear, is often when the worst financial decisions happen. People sell at the bottom, then wait for the market to feel safe again. But by the time it feels safe, the recovery has already happened. This pattern has repeated over and over through financial history. The 2008 financial crisis, the 2020 pandemic crash, the 2022 bear market. Every time, markets eventually recovered, but many investors didn't, because they exited during fear and re-entered during optimism, which means they experienced the downside of volatility without staying long enough to capture the upside of compounding. And this is why long-term investing is less about intelligence and more about emotional discipline. The people who end up with the biggest portfolios usually aren't the ones who predicted the market perfectly. They're the ones who simply stayed in the game. But there's another layer to this story, because $100,000 invested for 20 years is powerful. But the real secret of wealth isn't just how long money grows. It's how early it starts. And the difference between starting at 25 versus 35 can quietly cost someone hundreds of thousands of dollars. Imagine two people, same job, same income, same ability to invest. The only difference is when they start. Person A invests $100,000 at age 25, then leaves it alone for 20 years. Person B waits until age 35, then invests the exact same $100,000 for the same 20 years. Both investments earn the same average 10% annual return. At first glance, it feels like the difference shouldn't be dramatic. It's just 10 years, right? But remember what we talked about earlier. Compounding doesn't grow in a straight line. It grows on a curve. So here's what happens. By age 45, person A's investment has grown to about $672,000. Meanwhile, person B, who started 10 years later, will reach that same point at age 55. That 10-year delay didn't just cost time. It cost an entire decade of compounding. And those final years are the most powerful years of all. This is why financial experts often say something that sounds almost ridiculous at first. The first $100,000 is the hardest, but also the most important. Not because $100,000 is a magical number, but because it's the point where momentum starts forming. Once capital reaches a certain size, the returns begin doing more of the work. For example, if you have $500,000 invested, a typical 10% year adds $50,000. That's more than many people save in an entire year. At $1 million, that same return becomes $100,000 in growth. At that point, time becomes more powerful than effort. But here's the uncomfortable truth most people don't like to hear. The hardest part of investing isn't picking the right fund. It's building that first chunk of capital. Saving the first $100,000 requires discipline, delayed gratification, saying no to things today so your future self has options. And that's where most people quietly fall off the path. Not because they're irresponsible, but because modern life constantly encourages the opposite behavior. Spend now, upgrade now, enjoy now. Very few systems reward patience anymore, except one, the market. Because the market doesn't care about hype, emotions, or daily headlines. It only rewards one behavior consistently over long periods of time, staying invested. And that brings us to the final realization in this experiment. Because if $100,000 can turn into hundreds of thousands over 20 years, then the real question isn't just what happens to the money. The real question is something deeper. What kind of person are you becoming during those 20 years? When people think about investing, they usually imagine it as a financial decision. Numbers, charts, returns. But long-term investing is actually something else. It's a character test that plays out over decades. Because during those 20 years, life will happen. There will be recessions, market crashes, political chaos, headlines claiming the system is broken. Every few years, the world will feel like it's falling apart. And every time, investors will face the same quiet choice: stay or leave. History shows that the people who benefit most from compounding aren't the ones who perfectly time the market. They're the ones who develop a simple habit. They ignore the noise. They keep investing. They stay patient. They let time do the heavy lifting. And over long enough periods, something interesting happens. Money stops feeling like the main reward. Because what you really gain is freedom. Freedom from financial stress. Freedom to choose work you actually care about. Freedom to design your life instead of reacting to it. That's what compounding really buys you. Not just a larger portfolio, but time and options. And the strange part is that this entire process often begins with something that doesn't feel impressive at all. Just $100,000, left alone, for 20 years. If this video made you see investing, or time, a little differently, consider subscribing for more ideas about money, psychology, and long-term thinking. Because sometimes the most powerful financial strategies are also the quietest ones.